Thank you, Rich. I want to show I have 5 pages here. John Coverdale, who is a historian, he wrote a beautiful biography of Opus Dei, talks about being in Rome and going to a conference, and the speaker came with a stack of papers that he put on the podium. And as he spoke, he put the top page at the bottom. And so the bad thing was not only that he was reading the whole thing, but that you never knew how close to finishing he was, right? Because if you keep 2 stacks, at least you can gauge how much longer I'm going to be here. So 5 pages, and this will keep me going faster and more attentive to the topic. Paternal presence. Now I'm a collector of paternal information. I've been I would say knee-high with lower school students for about 35 years, waist-high with middle school students for 35 years, and neck-deep with upper school and college students for 35 years. So I've been blessed over that period of time to know literally thousands of dads. And I've, over time, collected just so many good things that happen and be able to begin to discern patterns of behavior. And even though there's no manual, there is no set rule of things that you must do, there are some behaviors that tend to work out better than others, and those are the ones that I talk about. The structure of this morning's presentation is such that it has 4 parts. The first one is going to be about the importance of being present and the challenges. The second one about the types of presence. Thirdly, about the stages of being present, and then some concluding remarks and takeaways, perhaps. So, the importance of being present in your children's lives. So I think it was San Jose Maria who told a story of a family. I believe he was in Mexico, but I'm not sure exactly where in the world. A family where both parents had very demanding professional jobs, and their son, who was, maybe about 9 or 10 years old, would spend hours and hours at home, not so much by himself, but with the gardener, who, the boy would love to go out and just spend time in the garden with this man, fixing things and such. And at one point, as the story goes, the dad, I think it was, asked the boy a question that none of you would ever ask, which was, who do you love more, mommy or daddy? Right? I mean, asking the question alone, that this man needed to be here a few times, right? So who do you love more, mommy or daddy? And the boy said, Francisco, the gardener. He spends time with me. Presence, right? You don't have to do a lot. The boy was not asking for Francisco's wisdom. He wasn't asking for Francisco's guidance. He wasn't asking for Francisco's leadership. He was asking for Francisco. He was asking for the presence, right? For the person to be there. G.K. Chesterton has the famous image, which I know if your sons are here, you've heard me talk about before, of the children playing on top of a mountain, and how if there are 4 severe cliffs on all sides of this mountain, you give the children a ball to play with, and half an hour later you'll find them all cuddled up in the middle of the mountaintop, afraid to play because of the sure death that will happen if they astray and lose their bearings. And he says, if you build a wall around the mountaintop, you will come back to see that they're walled in, but happily so, because now they can play with the safety of knowing that they're not going to kill themselves. And I think that's what paternal presence does. Your presence provides a wall around your children's lives, especially when they're younger. Your presence communicates to them that they are safe and everything is okay because you are there. Again, not because of what you do, but just the fact that Dad is there, it means that things are okay. At the same time, it is challenging, right? It is challenging to be present at home. You all, I'm sure, have had a conflict between your professional work and home. It just so happens that in most cases, your children and your professional work are quickly growing about the same time, right? You wish that you could space those out. But if you marry young and start having children, and you're towards the beginning of your career, those two are growing very fast at the same time. And there's going to be an actual direct conflict sometimes as to where are you more present and to whom do you dedicate most attention. Our professions occupy time, right? Long hours at work, commute. Even if you work out of the house or if you can bring work home, it's still work. And technology helps a lot. That now we can, our phone, we can check emails, we can stay connected. But at the same time, there's a ball and chain, because now I have it, and there's an expectation that I'm going to communicate, that I'm going to respond. Right? I think headmasters probably 50 years ago, when they left the office, there was no expectation that you could reach him at all until the next day. Right? You're not going to call his house unless somebody dies. Other than that, you're not going to call his house. Now there's going to be an expectation that you could be reachable 24 hours a day, even during weekends. And that's true for everybody, right? That is expectation. So even a technology that might, in theory, help us to be able to be more present to our children, maybe the technology that pulls us away from being truly present to our children, even if we are home, if we're not careful. Our professions can also take mental time. It's not just actual time, but mental time. Right, and I think we all know that you can be home and you can be physically present, but your mind is at work. Right, your mind is trying to figure that out. That needs to be fixed. There's a wonderful biography of Vince Lombardi, and in it, I was struck by a passage where his son, who at the time of the story he relates was in high school, I believe, talks about how deeply hurt he was as a son, that his father was not attentive to him, that his father cared about the Packers more than he cared about him, and talks about this particular instance of having dinner around the house. And he said, my father was really good about being home for dinner, but we're having dinner, and Dad would be totally silent the whole time. And I knew that he was trying to figure out the game plan for Sunday. And at one point towards the end of dinner, he cleared his throat. And my expectation was so great that he was finally going to say something and address me. And after clearing his throat a second time, his father said, pass the salt. And that was it. And the wound that created of thinking, my dad is a great man. And I recognize because everyone loves him. I think he's a great man. My dad is a great man, but he doesn't care about me. But I'm not a great child in his life. Right? So it's the mental presence, not just the physical presence. Our profession can also take emotional energy. I remember years ago visiting a friend and seeing him. I got to his house before he did, so I was talking with his wife and got a bunch of little children, and I saw him pull up to the driveway and get out of the driveway, and when somebody gets out of the car, it's been a long day. Just had that look, right? And I'm sure we've all had it, that you're dragging yourself up the driveway to get home. And as soon as he opened the door, his probably 4-year-old daughter came down the stairs, all excited, Daddy, 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 let me show you my picture. She had drawn a picture of the house, and as many of you have experienced, some sticks with coloring that goes way beyond the lines, right? A sun that is of no recognizable color, right? That kind of thing, like, let me show you my picture. And I was so moved by the transformation in this man's face, from total tiredness to a big smile, and grabbing her and putting her on his knee, and talking about the picture for way longer than I thought it was necessary. Or certainly the picture merited. Right? Talk about details of the drawing that were beyond my capacity to see and recognize and appreciate, right? But it's just so moved by this man's ability to shift and re-energize emotionally, so as to give to his daughter. What an example he was. And it's not just our profession, right? There's also personal interest, my own personal time. Or even, frankly, sometimes it could be, especially once your kids are teenagers and they're wonderful beings, but sometimes it could be that you get to the point where you really don't like your kid. And it's not that you're going to admit it to many others, right? It's not that you're going to tell your wife, I just don't like my kid. But sometimes kids are just not likable, right? Because they don't like themselves and they're a mess and they say things and they do things that you want to strangle them. And you might get to the point where you say, I really love him, but I just don't like him right now. Which means I really don't want to be around him because he just brings me down. And it makes me angry and makes me frustrated. And therefore, I'm not going to be around. There's such thing as bad presence. And it's an interesting question, like, at what point should you pull away? Like, I'm just so frustrated, I better get away from my kid's presence because it's only going to be negative. There may be those times, right? I need to go for a walk. Sometimes I've talked jokingly about having a room in the house padded with mattresses, where you can go and with a smile and say, I'll be back in a couple of minutes, and close the door and just punch the wall and punch her head and scream, and then come out and say, how's everyone doing, right? Maybe we need that, at least a mental space where you can do that. But that's another reason why sometimes we may not be present in our children's lives. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is not going to be to quit a demanding job necessarily, because in most cases you can't, right? You gotta support the family, and it's expensive to do so. And also, in other cases, even if you could financially, maybe you shouldn't for the common good, right? Because your job is demanding, but you're doing a lot of good for the world. And if there are people who need to have jobs where you can do a lot of good for the world, are people who really care about their families. Because otherwise, that vacuum is going to be filled by people who don't care about the family. And then no wonder they're going to be anti-family policies and in companies or in the state or whatever it might be. So we need people like you to be in prominent positions where you can exercise an influence. But at the same time, there's no mystery that to be in those positions takes a toll. Right? And that's really the question that we have to address. So what are the types of presence that I like to talk about? 4. The first one is physical, second one intellectual, third one moral, fourth one is spiritual. So physical presence. The 80s were big about quality time, right? Just, be present to your kids 5 minutes a day, but making really good 5 minutes. It just doesn't work that way, right? You can't go to your children and go, all right, children, we're going to have great quality time now, everyone, right? Let's do it together. It doesn't happen. Right? As a matter of fact, if you say that, it won't happen. Right? So it's quantity. One of the things that I've been doing for many years is, I get to see essays that seniors write when applying to college, and I've seen all kinds of things. But there was one that I remember from years ago where this student wrote about how his father was present in his life. And talk about how his father went to his sports games and, parent-teacher conferences, and he was always home for dinner and weekends and so forth. They're almost always home. But then what he said, when I was younger, I thought that he just had all the time in the world, right? As I got older in high school and I stayed late myself doing work, I realized one day when I came out of my room after doing homework at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I saw the light on in his office. And that happened another time the next week, another time. And then I asked him, do you always work that late? And he said, yes, I've been doing that for 15 years, since you were a little kid. I work from 8 to 3 to 2:30 to 5, depending on your games. And then I put another 3, 4, or 5 hours after you guys go to bed. Struck him. Wow, my dad was present, but he really sacrificed. He really cared about doing that. And I'm not saying that that's what you all should do, right? There's some ways in which that could go wrong if you don't get enough sleep. But what the boy was impressed about is his dad's dedication to being present. Your kids have expectations. They expect behaviors, right? They expect protocols, routines. Routines are really important, whatever they are. Saturday morning routines, going to mass routines, evening routines. What dad does, it matters to them, right? I am always surprised by, I have this habit. I guess I was standing in front of the building every morning, which started very organically because the first day that you're a headmaster, you don't know what you're supposed to do, right? Nobody will tell you this is what a headmaster does in the first half hour of the first day. Like, I don't know what it is. So, just go outside the building and stand, and then, the second day you wonder, like, do I do that again? Like, and then you do it, and then before you know, you're doing it. Like, well, I've been doing it for 20 years, so I can't not do it now. But I'm surprised, and I say hello to, I don't know, 10, 15% of the students, 20. Some shake my hand, some they just walk by, some they stumble by, Many enter for, other doors. I may see them 40 yards out as they go in. But it's interesting that even the ones who go side door, 40 yards out, more than once, if I haven't been there, they'll come up, almost invariably, any day that I'm not there, they'll come up and say, "Where were you, sir? You weren't there this morning." I'm like, and I could tell, listen, you never say hello, you never come my way, so what's to you, kid, right? Like, how has your day been any worse because of that, right? Give me one reason. Like, I'm not a bagel that you could eat. I can see if you don't have the bagel, your day is worse, but, But the point is that it matters to them because they have this concept that this is the way the world is. And I am safe if the world stays this way. And there is no doubt that the person who's going to provide safety in their lives most is you dads, right? You're being there. It doesn't matter. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be there, be part of the routine. So they know that when we wake up, dad is there. Then we go to school, dad is there. Then we come home, whatever it is, whatever that routine may be. And then presence, physical presence in your son's activities, that's an interesting question. Should you go to games or not go to games? I don't have a strong opinion on that one, and it depends on what you want to do, how much you like those games, whether you have the time to do it. The only suggestion I would offer is that whatever you do for one child, you should do for the other children. I remember talking to one kid once, and it came out in part of this emotional outburst of why life was so complicated, as sometimes it can happen to teenage boys, and really it's not that complicated, but the emotional outburst. And one thing was saying, my dad went to all my brother's games, he never comes to mine. Now, absolutes. I'm sure that dad didn't go to all the games that his brother played, and I'm sure he came to some that he played, but in his mind, that's the way it is. So he was not complaining that dad didn't go to his games. What he was complaining about is that the dad had gone to his brother's game and not his. Right? He took it personally. So that's the only suggestion I would have is I don't think it matters that much whether you go or not. It may be a really good thing to do for your relationship. It may not matter. That's a personal thing. But I think it probably matters if you do for one and not another in terms of their perception of who you care about more. Intellectual presence. I think your intellectual presence in your son's life, the first thing is to make sure that your son is present in your mind. Right? That's the first presence that really matters. That he is present in your thoughts, in your mind. That presence is permanent. Right? One day he is going to leave your house, but he's never going to leave your mind. Right? He's never going to leave your thoughts. He's always going to be present in your thoughts. It probably means that you need a preset time in which you're going to think about your kids. It's very easy to say, think about them all the time. Sure, but not purposefully. Right? When we think about somebody all the time, we're only reacting to thoughts. If I sit down and say, I'm going to think about this person now, then I can be more proactive in just how I think about it. And that matters because you have to think in a positive way about your kids. Otherwise, my guess is that most of the time you think about it when something went wrong and you're trying to fix it. And therefore, there's going to be an imbalanced amount of time that you think negatively about your children without realizing it. and it may affect the way that you think about it and the way you relate to them. So I think it helps to have a preset time. And maybe it's the commute home, if you have such a thing these days, right? Or maybe it's a walk around the neighborhood after I work for 10 minutes. I'm going to go through each one of them and think about, okay, what are they like? Anything that I should talk with them about? Anything that they need? Are they up emotionally? Are they down? What's coming up in their lives? If nothing else, so I can pray for them. And also, that if I see them, I can make that quick comment. Hey, how was your test? Hey, how was your game? Right? They'll know that they'll know that you're thinking about them. And also that you can have a conversation with your wives about the kids. And I think those conversations, you guys know, they're very important because your wife is going to bring in some insights that you yourself are not going to have. Some angle that you never have access to, but she does. That is going to provide those insights. But you're also going to provide a perspective that she doesn't have, kind of the male perspective. The other way in which there's this intellectual presence is by you being present in his mind, right? So not just he be present in your mind, but you be present in his mind, which means to be able to filter what he hears, what he sees, what he learns about the world. How to do that? Well, listening to them. Boys actually, I think, love to be listened to. Even though they don't talk a lot, some talk more than others, but they love to be listened to. They just want to be listened to knowing that they're not being judged. They always say that, don't judge me. Now, I'm going to say what I usually tell them when they do tell me that sometimes, don't judge me, sir, but I say, no, I am going to judge you. Right? It is impossible for me not to judge you upon what you tell me. But here's the point, is I'm going to judge you lovingly. Whatever you tell me is only going to make me love you more because you allow me to see you better. I'm not going to judge you critically. But if I were not to judge you, I would actually insult you very deeply. Because not to judge you means I do not care about you at all. You're non-existent in my thoughts. It doesn't matter what you do. And that's just not true. So, but for them to know, I'm not going to become critical of you, right? When you tell me whatever you tell me. Now, what happens is that kids, especially teenagers, and us have different conversation clock times, right? They're not going to talk when you want them to, and they're going to talk when you don't want to, right? It's going to be late at night, that you're tired and ready to go to bed, and they're going to come in and say, hey, Dad, I was just thinking, and you know that that's the conversation you hope you would have, not at 11 p.m. on a Monday, right? When you're tired and you have that meeting next morning. But you know that if you say, not now, later may not come, not in the same way. You know that in some ways, when a teenage boy comes in that way, hey, Dad, I was just thinking, it's really no different from the point of view of what you ought to do than a baby crying. And your wife saying, go hold him. Yeah, I'm going to be up for 45 minutes holding the baby. Of course you would do that. Yeah, I'm going to be up for 45 minutes holding my teenager's emotional conversation. Of course you have to do that, right? Probably more important. You begin to learn the art of drawing your kid out. What are the triggers? Space, time. Is it going for a drive? Is it going to get ice cream? Is it going for a hike? What is the space and the time that works for him, that he's more likely to speak out and say things and say whatever is in his mind? You begin to learn those. Sometimes your wives could be good informants as to that. Hey, do this with him, right? Hey, he really wants you to be with him in this way, right? He's talk about it, right? Not make it sound like I told you, make it sound like it's your idea, whatever it might be. Also thinking about what is my listening to given advice ratio, right? I think our reaction usually is whatever the kid tells me, I got to give a solution right now and fix it once and for all, right? That's the mental frame. Somewhat dangerous because that's a one-to-one listening to given advice ratio that typically is going to diminish what he's going to say. And here's the reason, is that the advice that we give, or if he tells us something of importance, one of three things are going to happen, most typically. One, I am going to do something about it. So your kid tells you that he was at somebody's house and they got some beers and drank. If he thinks, oh, I'm going to call that friend's dad and tell him, he may be more reluctant to tell, because now his communication and his losing control of what happens are instantaneous. And therefore, in his mind, that means no communication. The only way to get control is not communicating. So that's tricky. The other one is if, because of the communication, he's expected to do something that he doesn't want to do. Well, what you should do is go to that kid and tell him that he is a dishonest, bad person. And now, what does your kid do? I either do what my dad tells me to do, which I don't want to do and I'm not going to do, or I disappoint my dad. And then he's going to ask me again about it. Maybe I have to lie to him. Tricky. If the outcome is one and your kid knows that whatever he says, there is no automatic switch that gets flipped, but it leads to a conversation about how should we handle this. And it's always we as a team. Then he's going to be a lot more open because he knows he can talk without losing control. Rather, there's going to be that conversation. Moral presence, obviously through your example, right? The way that you love your wife is what he's going to see as the right treatment of women. Your appreciation for the truth is going to be the right treatment of the truth. You basically have virtue and power, right? That the question is, okay, how should I live and what virtue should I live now that I want my son to live at my age? How do I want to live my life now so that my son may imitate what I do? And I could look at that from heaven or when I'm 95 years old and in perfect health and say, I'm so proud of my son, right? The way he's living his life. Offering corrections, obviously, but always with a smile, with a hug, right? That the boy knows that the engine behind the correction is love. The vehicle of the correction is charity. The outcome of the correction is hope, and is hope filled with faith, right? Hope that you're going to be a better person because you will be a better person, and that's why I correct you. It's not that so that we may look better, but it's because you are called to be a better man, and this correction will help you with it. Spiritual presence. That's example, I think, of a spiritual living is, I think, more important than your wife's example as your boys get older. And the reason for that is that if you don't offer a strong example of a spiritual presence, or through your presence of a spiritual life, your boy may think that having a spiritual life is a feminine trait that men don't, because that is different. And he needs to learn from you what does it mean to be a man of faith, not only because of the decisions that you take, but also the way you represent, manifest that faith. I have I'm not sure that this is a good example because I haven't figured out if it is a good example since I witnessed it as probably about a 10-year-old. And it was the example of my own dad and his faith. And I know that he had, there wasn't a single holy card to Our Lady that he didn't like and kept. I think when he passed away cleaning the main room in the house, I think I found like 24 of these things. Sometimes some of them framed, some behind other ones, like, my gosh. I think he just felt bad not like framing one and putting it up. That's an example, but what I remember, one of the things I remember most is his praying the rosary before Mass in the church on his knees. And I can't tell you why, but knowing as a kid that there was a qualitative difference in the way my mom prayed the rosary and my dad prayed the rosary. That somehow when he prayed, there was a manliness to it. It wasn't it wasn't just praying the rosary. It was like a soldier going down on his knees before the Queen and rendering his services to the Queen and expecting protection for the Queen. That's the sentiment that I got. I can't tell you why. Right? He was not an overly pious guy, but just the way he would kneel, the way he would stay kneeling on this wooden kneeler, right, in the church that we went to. And maybe the rosary beads that he had that were, brown and wood, made out of wood. I don't know what it was. The other representation is one time we're vacationing in this small town, and we're walking home, and it was my dad, mom, and 3 brothers. I was the youngest. I was about 10. And we came up on this car that had stalled, and the guy was probably in his early 20s, and I think he was drunk or high or something. And, he couldn't get this thing going. And it was right in the middle of the intersection. And, my dad went and said, "Do you need any help?" And then the guy, started getting pretty rude about how he didn't need any help from anybody. And, my dad said, "All right, man, just fine, stay in the intersection for the rest of your life. I don't care," right? And so they walk away. And this guy kind of blasphemes, says something about Our Lady, And I just remember my dad turned around and with the back of his hand just gave him a slap on the face, right? And sent the guy over the hood on the ground. And it's us, the 3 brothers, like holding Dad back, like, "Dad, like, let it go. It's okay." And it's like, all right, sorry about that. I don't know that it is a good example, right? I'm not telling you, go look for drunk people to slap around in front of your children because they're going to think it's really cool. Like, I don't know that it's a good example. I just remember thinking, wow, you don't do that, right? Like, you don't say anything about Our Lady that way, right? You just don't. And you don't let anybody do it. So the example of that spiritual life, whether it is through holy cards, the manliness, but it has to be a manly representation of that spiritual life. Fairly quickly, the degrees and the stages of presence. I'd say, 4 stages. Holding the hand, holding the back of the bike seat, holding the steering wheel on the right of the vehicle, holding the phone. What does that mean? I don't know. I thought it sounded cool this morning. But let me go through them. Okay, holding the hand. Well, when the kids are younger, I'm thinking lower school, pre-K through 5th, control his life a lot more, right? He's not making independent decisions. He's not organizing activities on his own. There's a lot more correction of manners, of relationships, right? There is no independent social life that the kid has, or very, very little. Some in the school, sports teams, neighborhood, but very controlled. There are a lot of regular small corrections that you make, little things, almost all the time. Come here, don't do that. Be careful. It almost becomes like a mantra, right? So that's a type of presence, right? It's a very involved, very directive presence. Holding the bike seat, I would think this is in middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th. Right? You're no longer holding the hand and walking alongside. You're behind. You're holding the bike seat to make sure there's no wreck, but just always hoping to let go. Right? Whenever you teach your kid to ride a bike, the goal is not to hold the bike seat forever. Right? As a matter of fact, one thing is clear: you don't want to hold the bike seat. As soon as he can go on his own, much better. That's the middle school. As soon as he can go on his own, academically, socially, in the sports, better. At the same time, that he wobbles a little bit still, right? So you have to hold the bike seat. You're looking for him to make more and more choices, but at the same time, you're watching over those choices more and more, right? To make sure that the right choices, and offering guidance or saying, no, that's not a right choice, we're not going to do that, or encouraging more, managing his activities, but gradually hoping that he takes ownership of those activities. After that is, holding the second steering wheel, the driver said, right? He's driving, you have the second steering wheel that hopefully you don't have to touch. But if things get bad, you can, right? To make sure to avoid that wreck. And that's more the upper school. That's more the high school. You really hope that he's driving on his own, that he learns to drive totally independently. He's just not quite there yet. So you still have to be attentive. A lot of that is leading by example, gentle suggestions, right? Take a right, going a little bit too fast, right? You can speed up now, right? Watching, observing on your part. Pieper has a beautiful set of essays. I think the title is something like On the Virtues of the Human Heart. And in one of those, he talks about contemplation and the need for us to contemplate. So I say, you need to contemplate your children. And he defines contemplation as observing lovingly. Which I think is a beautiful way, right? It's not observing critically. Let me see what's wrong with this. It's not observing judgmentally. It's not observing dispassionately. It's observing lovingly. I'm observing my children. I love them. And I may see blemishes, things that I need to correct, but overall is, thank you, God, for giving me children. Thank you, God, for entrusting me these children. And then finally, holding the phone. And this is when they go to college and beyond, right? You're holding the phone that is, I'm ready for whatever they need. Right? They'll reach out to me, and I'm ready to be there for them, for whatever they need, any time of the day. Now, if I don't hear from them, I may call them. Right, holding the phone doesn't mean that I can't dial in. Right, sometimes I may have to dial. Hey, how's it going? Especially if I know that he may be going through a difficult time. So, to conclude, and maybe just offer a couple takeaways, but as broad suggestions. Right, first one is that there's no manual for this. I mentioned this at the very beginning. Right, it's always case by case. Right, it's case by case as to how exactly should I be present in my children's lives? How am I not present now? There are too many personal circumstances that factor into that decision. Your family size, the temperament of your children, the ages of your children, your own temperament, your own disposition, your own personality, financial realities, your wife's expectations, how visible you could be to the world, what you could contribute to the common good, through your professional work. There are way too many factors. So I think that even though it's case by case, just being aware of the fact that presence matters is a huge step. Right? Just being aware that presence matters. The self-examination, where we check ourselves as to, do I really need to be away from home now? Or is it just easier to be away from home now? Is it easier? Is work more manageable than home? And therefore more attractive during these particular hours of the day? What is the need versus the want in terms of my being away from home? A professional net gain exercise, right? What do I get by being away more, and what do I give up? Right? Not that it's a spreadsheet exercise necessarily, but just an interesting examination, right? And accountability. Can my wife hold me accountable? Can she tell me, you need to be home more? You need to talk to so-and-so. You need to make an effort to be more attentive, right? You've been very distracted during family dinners. Perhaps it's a spiritual director. Perhaps it's a close, true friend. 90% of success is showing up. And it's also right place, right time. Right? It's not being there 24 hours a day. You can't. But boy, those 2 minutes in the morning really matter at this point. Or the half hour in the evening really matters. Right? The right time, right place. Behave as you want your son to behave at your age. I think just a good motto. Like behave not only in their presence, but even in their absence. And that's perhaps the prayer. Let me be the father I want my sons to be, so that they may have that clear image. And I'll conclude with Mother Teresa's saying that you all know, I'm sure, where she says that God does not expect you to be perfect. He expects you to be loyal. And I think applied to being a dad, you could say your children don't expect you to be perfect. they expect you to be loyal. They expect you to be dedicated. They expect you to be there. You obviously are because you're here, right? The coffee is okay, but you didn't come here for the coffee, right? You could get better coffee elsewhere, right? You're here because you really care about your children, and you really care about doing the right thing. And the question then for you is, well, now that I'm investing this time here at the Heights this morning, what one thing can I do that's going to make me be an even better dad, more present in my children's lives? What is that one thing? And that would be a wonderful takeaway at the end of the day. So thank you very much for your presence.